Okay, so I would like to talk about how learning about trauma and learning more about the body and the nervous system has made an impact on my spiritual journey. All right. Because I think that maybe some of you who are either more familiar with the spiritual journey or more familiar with the healing, on trauma and nervous system regulation, all that, may not quite have experienced or seen how connected these two things are, right? The spiritual journey and trauma. So I came from, the line of, relationship with God and being prayerful and learning about my faith, taking my faith seriously, seeking God, wanting to have a better relationship with Him, wanting to learn more about Him, desiring to grow in my prayer life so that I can be closer to God. And so from that place, learning, trying different methods of prayer, different spiritualities, going for different kinds of retreats. And there's so many. There's just so many, right? Too many. I mean, in a good way. In a good way. As a Catholic, I love how rich our history and our tradition is, and the many strands of spiritualities and the many charisms from, different religious orders, even different ways of praying, of seeking God. That to me reflects the diversity of the creation that God made. There is no one way, right? Even in this one family or this one church, there are so many ways. There are so many unique ways and paths that emphasize different facets of truth, of beauty, of goodness, right? I think they reflect different facets of God. So on one hand, it's wonderful because it's so rich. But on the other hand, it can be very overwhelming. And it's easy for us to feel stuck or give up when we realize just how much there is. When every other person out of good intention tells you this is what you need to do. You should pray, for example, the rosary every day. Another person tells you, you should also add in, devotion to, divine mercy, right? Or there's so many, or this novena and that novena, and and this retreat, or pray the liturgy of the hours. I mean, plus maybe do a holy hour, and then you need to study scripture. How many hours do we have in the day? Right? And if we try to cover all of these, we're not going to be able to accomplish anything. And so I tried, I think for many years, not all at once. I tried in different seasons of my life. I was led to different ways and different ways of deepening my relationship with God. And they all did help. But even as I drew closer to Christ and God, there was something I noticed. That hollowness that was inside me didn't go away. Okay. Let's say I'm in prayer. Did it help me grow in the fruit of the Spirit? Yes. Especially when I'm in prayer or shortly after, or in spaces where I wasn't so maybe easily triggered. But the moment I'm back in familiar environments where triggers are plenty. So, for example, let's say in family or at work, right? When there's something or a personality that is very challenging, specifically to maybe the issues that are inside me, I still can't help my reaction. That's what I observed about myself. And so for years, it was I think, maybe a necessary part of my pain, or a necessary part of the lesson of the journey. I saw that I was still helpless. And I also want to say, I believe it was necessary for me to feel that helplessness. To really, really get it, just how impossible even the tiniest step is without grace. And I had to learn to be patient and to wait and to trust that if God hadn't given me the grace to do something yet, then He hasn't called me to do it yet. I shouldn't be measuring myself to, certain what I thought were like objective standards of spiritual excellence or moral excellence, or what it means to be Christ-like. If He hasn't given me the grace to do that specific action or to be that, that way yet, then the honest truth and authentic place to be is I'm not there yet. And that's where God meets me, right? then a point came when, I guess, in my journey, where the Lord revealed to me that all the growth I had experienced up to that point was built on a very shaky and even rotten foundation, actually. I mean, the image that came in that retreat, that prayer, was that there was something wrong in the foundations of the building that I was trying to erect, to build, and although there's been a lot of construction already on the walls and of that building, in that particular prayer image, it was a church that was being erected. I felt the Lord tell me this project is not going to be able to be completed because there's rot in the foundation, and the only way to complete this building is to tear everything down that you see, and then not only just tear everything down that you can visibly see above ground. We are going to have to excavate the foundation, scoop everything up, dig everything up, clear out everything in the foundation, and then start again. And start again. And this time, he said, we do it right. Stone by stone, we'll do it right, we'll do it together. And you can imagine, I was in my, I think, beyond mid-30s when that particular prayer revelation came. And I've been trying for, so hard to build my spiritual life for more than a decade. Actually, I would say 2 decades already by then. And to hear at that point that we have to tear everything down and even go to the foundations, like clear the foundations. If he hadn't already built my security in him to the point that I was when I heard that, there's no way I could have accepted that. All right. I would have been so discouraged. But I wasn't. I mean, it didn't feel like good news, but at the same time, I knew he was speaking the truth to me. And if that was the way, then that was the way, right? So for a few years after that, it wasn't still clear to me what he meant that the foundations needed to be excavated, that everything needed to be torn down and the foundations need to be excavated. It was only after a few years of very disorienting kind of spiritual experiences where all the things that used to work before didn't work, didn't stick. And the younger parts of me, the rebellious parts of me, all started surfacing, and I let them surface because in the past, I would always press those parts down. I would shove them off to the side because they didn't reflect to me what spiritual maturity should look like. They didn't reflect to me what responsibility and and goodness and discipline looked like. So I shut them up, I pushed them away in order to build and focus on what I thought were the right things, right? So when the undoing began, I would say even I'm not the one that was undoing it. It felt like God was undoing me. All those parts that had been long repressed, they all surged up and sought my attention. They wanted air, they wanted to be seen and heard and acknowledged. And so that happened for a while. It felt so weird because it's the first time I'm letting them out and knowing that God is with me and loving them. Like loving these parts of me that I always thought should have no part in being a good Christian, a responsible Christian. And then that went on for a few years before I stumbled across, literature about trauma, about complex trauma, which is not just those big, life-threatening events like natural disasters or huge accidents or events that literally threaten our life or put us in grave physical danger or war. I mean, usually when we think of trauma, we think of all those big things. But I learned that there's such a thing called complex trauma, which is a lot more everyday, right? For example, that growing up in a family with mental disease, if someone in your family, especially if one of your parents had mental disease or addiction like alcoholism or gambling, that a child growing up in the environment would be a victim of, and a survivor of complex trauma, because those kind of instances usually would reflect an inability for the parents, the caregivers, to be present, to have healthy attachment with the child, which we all need for healthy brain development, and not just healthy brain development, to learn how to regulate our emotions, how to relate to other people securely. And there are so many reasons why that wouldn't have been available to us, right? So even outside of mental disease or outside of having addiction in the family, if your parents were out at work a lot, maybe because it's necessary, right? And they couldn't be there for you reliably. If you were, brought up by someone else who wasn't also able to give what was necessary for that healthy development in the child, we would have abandonment issues. We would have insecure attachment styles. And a lot of times, because our own caregivers, our own parents, even if they were there physically and they did their best, maybe because they were survivors of complex trauma themselves and they weren't attuned to their own emotions, so they couldn't attune to us when we were children. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And something happens to us. Something happens to us, and so much of what we know as ourselves right? As in, so much of our personalities and the way we react and do things, they are coping mechanisms. They are defense mechanisms, Like for me, always reading the emotional temperature of the people around me, especially the important people around me. So let's say people in authority, my parents, my boss, my teachers, or significant others, friends that I love, or my spouse, even my dog. I just want to say, sometimes it's just how funny it is, right? I try and read the emotional temperature of my dog. Why? Because something in me can't bear it if somebody who is significant to me or who has an impact on my life is emotionally dysregulated. I feel it. It affects my emotional stability when somebody close to me is emotionally in distress, right? And I never knew that was not just the fact that I was sensitive and that I had a lot of empathy. It wasn't just that. It was because something has been damaged in me, my ability. I never really knew or learned how to regulate my emotions and how to have a boundary, around what's me and what's mine, including my emotions, and what's someone else's emotion, right? And I couldn't help it. I always felt responsible, even when I really am not the one that's responsible for another person's problem. I didn't know how to draw near to help without feeling deeply personally responsible and emotionally completely vested, in the other person's drama, right? So it was only after I learned about complex trauma and about the impact of complex trauma on the nervous system that I understood this is what was going on with me. And that's why, even with all the deepening of my spiritual life, of prayer life, these realities, the experiences inside me never changed. They didn't change. And you know what? It was God who led me to this literature. It was God who step by step, as He healed me and taught me, led me to understand, more about the body that He created, that He gave me, that He gave human beings, the way He designed me, and the way He wants to relate to me. And He's the one that showed me that I've been so cut off from my own, not just my emotions, because I think I find emotions very overwhelming. My body. I've been so cut off from my body. I've denigrated my body. I've separated myself from what is actually meant to be me, not just a part of me, but part, really me. I am my body also, I never thought that was the case. But that's what God was showing, that I can't be separated. My intellect and my emotions and my body and my soul, my spirit, and they can't be separated. We can think of them distinctly, but they operate together, in synchrony. And when we are disintegrated because of trauma and all that, we can't worship Him as a whole self. We can't receive Him and His love because there are parts of us that are not in operation or are in dysfunction. And so I just hope that this little sharing may surface to you and highlight to you how all this, the new literature that we see now about trauma and nervous system, really, really, is related to and can help us on our spiritual journey, coming closer to God and becoming more able to give and receive love.